3 funerals in as many months. 3 grieving widows, each mourning beneath identical black veils. 3 coffins crafted by the same skilled hands. What the good people of Boston didn't realize was that death had not come naturally to these respected gentlemen, and the Undertaker who buried them knew far more about their demise than any man should. Before we descend into the shadowed world of early Boston society, I must pause to acknowledge the incredible community that has gathered around these stories. Your continued support, your thoughtful comments, and your willingness to explore history's darkest corners alongside me makes each episode possible. To our dedicated subscribers and those who share these tales with others, you have my deepest gratitude. A special recognition goes to our channel members whose names grace the screen now. Your commitment to preserving these forgotten mysteries goes beyond mere viewership. Those interested in joining this exclusive circle will find membership details in the description below. Now, let us step back to the cobblestone streets of Federal Boston, where 3 women discovered that widowhood could be a profession, and death, carefully orchestrated, could be the most profitable business of all. The dawn of the 19th century found Boston transformed from a colonial port into America's undisputed commercial capital. The Federal period had brought unprecedented prosperity to merchants who traded with Europe despite the ongoing tensions between Britain and France. Elegant Federal-style mansions lined Beacon Hill, while the harbor bristled with ships carrying everything from Chinese tea to Caribbean sugar. Yet beneath this veneer of Puritan respectability, the city harbored secrets that would have scandalized its founding fathers. The Embargo Act of 1807 still lay in the future, but already savvy Boston merchants were preparing for the disruptions that European warfare would inevitably bring to Atlantic trade. This atmosphere of cautious prosperity and subtle anxiety created opportunities for those clever enough to exploit the intersection of commerce, society, and human mortality. Our first case centers around the elegant Marlborough Street residence of Mrs. Abigail Thornton, a woman whose beauty had survived 4 decades and whose intelligence had only grown sharper with age. At 42, Abigail commanded respect in Boston's tight-knit merchant society, not merely as the widow of successful importer Harrison Thornton, but as a woman who had proven capable of managing complex business affairs that many men would have found daunting. Harrison Thornton had built his fortune importing luxury goods from London and Paris, catering to Boston's growing appetite for European refinement. When he died suddenly in 1799, leaving Abigail with a substantial estate but no male heirs, the city's commercial community expected her to quickly remarry or sell the business to more experienced hands. Instead, Abigail had surprised everyone by not only maintaining her husband's trading relationships, but expanding them into new markets. Her success had come at a cost. Boston's merchant wives, many of whom struggled with the basic management of household accounts, viewed Abigail's business acumen with a mixture of admiration and resentment. She was frequently invited to their social gatherings, where her advice on investment and property management was eagerly sought, yet she remained somewhat apart from their daily concerns about children and domestic arrangements. This isolation had drawn Abigail into an unlikely friendship with 2 other women who existed on the margins of Boston's social hierarchy, Mrs. Lydia Blackwood and Mrs. Mercy Standish. Like Abigail, both women had lost husbands under circumstances that had left them financially secure but socially vulnerable. Lydia Blackwood had been married to Dr. Josiah Blackwood, one of Boston's most respected physicians, until his death from what appeared to be the same fever he had been treating in several patients. At 38, Lydia possessed an extensive knowledge of medicinal compounds and therapeutic practices, knowledge she had acquired by assisting her husband during his final years, when his health had begun to decline. Dr. Blackwood's practice had included some of Boston's wealthiest families, and his medical notes, which Lydia had inherited along with his other possessions, contained intimate details about the health conditions and personal habits of the city's elite. This information had proven valuable in ways that extended far beyond medical treatment, providing insights into the vulnerabilities and secrets of people who preferred to keep such matters private. Mercy Standish, the youngest of the 3 at 35, had been married to Captain Ezra Standish, whose shipping business had connected Boston merchants with suppliers throughout the Caribbean. Captain Standish had died in a harbor accident when a cargo load shifted unexpectedly, crushing him beneath several tons of imported mahogany. The tragedy had left Mercy with a detailed understanding of shipping schedules, cargo manifests, and the complex network of relationships that governed maritime commerce. What bound these three women together was more than shared widowhood or social isolation. Each had discovered that their respective areas of expertise, when combined, created opportunities that none could have pursued alone. Abigail's business connections, Lydia's medical knowledge, and Mercy's understanding of shipping logistics formed a partnership that operated beneath the surface of Boston's respectable society. Their collaboration had begun innocently enough, with Lydia providing medical advice to Abigail's business associates and Mercy facilitating favorable shipping arrangements for various commercial ventures. However, as their friendship deepened and their understanding of each other's capabilities grew more sophisticated, they began to recognize possibilities that extended into darker territories. The catalyst for their transformation from business partners to something far more dangerous came in the form of a problem that threatened all three of their interests. Mr. Cornelius Bradshaw, a prominent merchant and city councilman, had been investigating irregularities in several recent business dealings that involved companies connected to each of the three women. Bradshaw's investigation focused on a series of property transfers and shipping contracts that had generated substantial profits for select investors while leaving others with significant losses. The councilman had begun to suspect that these transactions were not the result of market forces or superior business acumen, but rather coordinated manipulation by individuals with access to privileged information. His suspicions were not entirely unfounded. The three widows had indeed been sharing intelligence gleaned from their respective networks, allowing them to anticipate market movements and position themselves advantageously. While not illegal, their activities existed in a moral gray area that would have damaged their reputations if exposed. More concerning was Bradshaw's growing interest in the circumstances surrounding their husbands' deaths. The councilman had noticed that each of the three men had died at times that proved remarkably beneficial to their widows' subsequent business activities, and he had begun making discreet inquiries about the medical and circumstantial details of each death. It was Lydia who first suggested that their problem might require a permanent solution. Her medical training had given her an intimate understanding of how death could appear natural even when it was carefully induced, and her late husband's patient files contained detailed information about Bradshaw's own health conditions and personal habits. The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Bradshaw suffered from recurring digestive problems that he treated with various patent medicines and home remedies. Lydia knew from her husband's notes that the councilman was particularly susceptible to compounds that affected his cardiovascular system, information that could be exploited through careful manipulation of his self-medication routine. Mercy's contribution came through her knowledge of shipping schedules and cargo manifests. She was able to determine when specific medicinal compounds would arrive in Boston's harbor and arrange for their discreet acquisition before they reached their intended destinations. This allowed Lydia to obtain the materials she needed without leaving any record of their purchase or use. Abigail's role was to provide the social context that would bring Bradshaw into contact with the modified medicines without arousing suspicion. Her position in Boston's merchant community gave her access to the councilman's social circle and created opportunities for the kind of casual interaction that could facilitate their plan's execution. The execution began in early March 1801. When Abigail invited Bradshaw to a small dinner party at her Marlborough Street residence. The gathering was ostensibly designed to discuss a proposed municipal improvement that would benefit the city's merchant community, but it also provided an opportunity for Lydia to observe Bradshaw's symptoms firsthand and confirm the details contained in her late husband's medical notes. During the evening, Bradshaw complained of the digestive troubles that had been plaguing him for several weeks. Lydia, introduced as a friend with some knowledge of medical matters due to her late husband's profession, suggested a remedy that she claimed had proven effective for similar conditions. The remedy was a common enough preparation, differing from standard formulations only in the addition of certain compounds that would interact fatally with medications Bradshaw was already taking. Mercy's role came into play through her suggestion that Bradshaw might benefit from a specific imported remedy that she knew would be arriving on a ship scheduled to dock within the week. Her knowledge of shipping schedules allowed her to time this recommendation precisely, ensuring that Bradshaw would receive the modified medication at the optimal moment for their plan's success. The councilman's death occurred on March 15th, following several days of increasing illness that his physician attributed to a particularly severe recurrence of his chronic digestive condition. Dr. William Hartwell, who attended Bradshaw during his final hours, noted that the patient's symptoms were consistent with a gastric fever complicated by cardiovascular collapse, a diagnosis that satisfied both the family and the city authorities. Bradshaw's funeral was conducted by Mr. Ezekiel Morton, Boston's most respected undertaker, whose establishment on Washington Street had served the city's prominent families for over 2 decades. Morton's reputation for discretion and dignity made him the natural choice for families seeking to maintain their social standing even in grief. The funeral proceeded with appropriate solemnity, attended by much of Boston's merchant and political community. Abigail, Lydia, and Mercy were present among the mourners, their expressions appropriately somber as they paid their respects to a man whose investigation had threatened their carefully constructed partnership. With Bradshaw's death, the investigation into their business activities ceased, allowing the 3 women to continue their collaboration without fear of exposure. However, their success in eliminating this threat had revealed capabilities that could be applied to other problems, and it was not long before another opportunity presented itself. Mr. Josiah Whitmore had been one of Harrison Thornton's former business partners, a relationship that had ended acrimoniously when Whitmore attempted to claim a larger share of certain profitable ventures after Thornton's death. Abigail had successfully defended her interests through legal channels, but Whitmore had continued to pursue various forms of retaliation designed to damage her reputation and business relationships. Whitmore's campaign against Abigail had grown increasingly vicious, including whispered suggestions that her husband's death had been suspiciously convenient and that her subsequent business success indicated knowledge of market conditions that she could not have obtained legitimately. These accusations, while unproven, were beginning to affect Abigail's standing in Boston's commercial community. The 3 women recognized that Whitmore represented the same type of threat that Bradshaw had posed, but with the added dimension of personal vindictiveness that made him unlikely to abandon his campaign regardless of rational considerations. Once again, they concluded that a permanent solution was required. Whitmore's elimination proved more challenging than Bradshaw's due to his naturally suspicious nature and his growing wariness of anything connected to Abigail's circle. However, his weakness for gambling provided an avenue of approach that the 3 women were able to exploit through careful planning and execution. Lydia's contribution involved her knowledge of stimulants and depressants that could affect judgment and decision-making without producing obvious symptoms of intoxication. Her late husband's medical notes contained detailed information about compounds used to treat various nervous conditions, knowledge that could be adapted for more sinister purposes. Mercy's role centered on her connections within Boston's informal gambling community, relationships she had developed through her late husband's involvement in various speculative ventures. These connections allowed her to arrange for Whitmore to be invited to specific gambling sessions where he could be exposed to the modified substances without realizing their source. Abigail provided the financial resources necessary to ensure that Whitmore's gambling sessions would be sufficiently lucrative to maintain his interest while gradually exposing him to increasingly dangerous combinations of stimulants and cardiac medications. Her business experience allowed her to structure these arrangements in ways that appeared to be the result of natural market forces rather than deliberate manipulation. The process required several weeks of careful implementation, during which Whitmore's gambling sessions grew more frequent and more financially significant. The modified substances gradually accumulated in his system, creating a condition that his physician would later describe as acute nervous exhaustion, complicated by cardiac irregularities. Whitmore's death on April 22 was attributed to the combined effects of business stress and irregular living habits, a diagnosis that surprised no one familiar with his reputation for reckless behavior. His funeral was again conducted by Ezekiel Morton, whose services were becoming increasingly familiar to the 3 widows as they attended yet another burial of a man whose death had solved significant problems for their continued prosperity. The success of their second elimination emboldened the 3 women to consider even more ambitious applications of their collaborative abilities. Their attention turned to Mr. Benjamin Crawford, a wealthy merchant whose shipping business competed directly with several of Mercy's inherited interests. Crawford had been systematically undercutting prices and stealing contracts from companies associated with Captain Standish's former network, actions that threatened to seriously damage the value of Mercy's inheritance. Moreover, Crawford had begun spreading rumors about the circumstances of Captain Standish's death, suggesting that the harbor accident might not have been as accidental as it appeared. These accusations were particularly dangerous because they contained elements of truth. Captain Standish's death had indeed resulted from a carefully orchestrated accident, though one arranged by business rivals rather than his wife. Mercy had discovered the truth about her husband's murder through her subsequent investigation of his business records, but she had chosen to pursue private justice rather than legal remedies that might have exposed other secrets. Crawford's investigation threatened to uncover this history, potentially leading to revelations that could destroy all three women. Once again, they concluded that elimination was the only viable solution, but Crawford's suspicious nature and prominent position in the community made him a particularly challenging target. The plan they developed for Crawford required the most sophisticated coordination of their respective skills. Lydia's medical expertise was focused on compounds that could simulate the symptoms of common diseases, allowing Crawford's death to appear as the natural result of an epidemic illness that had been affecting several prominent families. Mercy's shipping knowledge was used to arrange for Crawford to be exposed to contaminated cargo from specific vessels, creating a plausible source of infection that would explain his subsequent illness. Her connections within the maritime community allowed her to coordinate these exposures without leaving evidence of deliberate contamination. Abigail's role involved creating the social circumstances that would bring Crawford into contact with the contaminated materials while providing alternative explanations for his illness that would deflect suspicion from their activities. Her position in Boston's merchant community gave her the credibility necessary to influence how Crawford's condition was interpreted by both physicians and the general public. The execution of their plan began in early May, when Crawford was invited to inspect a cargo shipment that Abigail claimed contained goods of particular interest to his business. The inspection was arranged through intermediaries to avoid direct connection to any of the three women, but it succeeded in exposing Crawford to materials that had been deliberately contaminated with pathogens that would produce symptoms resembling yellow fever. Crawford's illness progressed over the course of 2 weeks, during which his condition was monitored by Dr. Samuel Prescott, one of Boston's most respected physicians. Dr. Prescott's diagnosis of yellow fever was supported by the apparent presence of similar cases among other individuals who had been exposed to cargo from the same general source. Crawford's death on May 30th was recorded as the result of epidemic disease, a conclusion that satisfied both medical and civic authorities who were concerned about preventing the spread of infection. His funeral, once again conducted by Ezekiel Morton, was attended by a smaller group due to concerns about contagion, but the three widows were present to pay their respects to another man whose death had solved significant problems for their continued success. By the summer of 1801, the three women had eliminated 3 separate threats to their partnership while maintaining their positions in Boston's respectable society. Their success had been built on the complementary nature of their skills and their ability to coordinate complex operations without leaving evidence of their involvement. However, their repeated use of Ezekiel Morton's services had begun to attract the Undertaker's attention. Morton was a careful observer of Boston's social patterns, and he had noticed the unusual frequency with which certain individuals seemed to require his services. More troubling, he had begun to observe similarities in the circumstances surrounding these deaths that suggested causes more complex than natural disease or accident. Morton's suspicions were initially based on subtle inconsistencies in the physical evidence he observed while preparing bodies for burial. His experience with hundreds of corpses had given him an intimate knowledge of how different causes of death affected the human body, and he had noticed details that contradicted the official explanations for several recent deaths. Bradshaw's body had shown signs of chemical poisoning that were inconsistent with the gastric fever diagnosis, while Whitmore's remains displayed cardiovascular damage that suggested exposure to specific compounds rather than natural nervous exhaustion. Most concerning was Crawford's corpse, which lacked several symptoms that Morton would have expected to see in a genuine yellow fever case. These observations led Morton to review his records of recent burials, revealing a pattern that connected the 3 suspicious deaths to the social circle surrounding Abigail Thornton, Lydia Blackwood, and Mercy Standish. The Undertaker realized that he had unknowingly become an accessory to what appeared to be a sophisticated murder conspiracy. Morton's position was precarious. As an Undertaker, his livelihood depended on maintaining the trust and respect of Boston's prominent families, relationships that would be destroyed if he became known as someone who questioned official causes of death or spread rumors about his clients. Yet his conscience was troubled by the growing evidence that he was facilitating the concealment of multiple murders. The Undertaker's dilemma was resolved when he discovered additional evidence that confirmed his suspicions while providing him with leverage over the three women. While preparing Whitmore's body for burial, Morton had found a small glass vial hidden in the dead man's clothing, a vial that contained residues of compounds that were clearly not legitimate medications. Morton's knowledge of poisons, acquired through years of preserving corpses with various chemical preparations, allowed him to identify the vial's contents as a sophisticated mixture of stimulants and cardiac medications that would have proven fatal when combined with alcohol. The vial's presence suggested that Whitmore had been deliberately poisoned, contradicting the official diagnosis of natural death from nervous exhaustion. Armed with this evidence, Morton approached the three women with a proposal that would protect both his conscience and his business interests. Rather than exposing their conspiracy to authorities, he offered to become a silent partner in their enterprise, providing them with information about potential targets while ensuring that future eliminations would be carried out in ways that left no physical evidence. Morton's proposition was based on his recognition that the three women's activities, while criminal, were also potentially profitable for someone with his unique position in Boston society. His access to the homes and private affairs of the city's wealthiest families provided opportunities for intelligence gathering that could be valuable to people engaged in sophisticated fraud and murder. The three women initially resisted Morton's proposal, recognizing that accepting a new partner would compromise their security while reducing their individual shares of future profits. However, they also realized that rejecting the Undertaker's offer would likely lead to their exposure and prosecution, making partnership preferable to the alternatives. The negotiations that followed established Morton as the fourth member of their conspiracy, with specific responsibilities for intelligence gathering and evidence concealment. His funeral home would serve as a meeting place where the four partners could coordinate their activities without arousing suspicion, while his professional relationships would provide access to information about potential targets and their vulnerabilities. Morton's first contribution to the partnership involved identifying Mr. Augustus Pemberton as a target whose elimination would benefit all four members of the conspiracy. Pemberton was a wealthy banker whose institution held mortgages on several properties owned by the three women, mortgages that contained terms unfavorable enough to threaten their long-term financial security. More importantly, Pemberton had begun investigating irregularities in several recent estate settlements that Morton had handled, investigations that could potentially expose the Undertaker's role in concealing evidence of murder. The banker's elimination would solve multiple problems while demonstrating Morton's value to the partnership. The plan developed for Pemberton's murder represented the most sophisticated operation the group had yet attempted. Morton's intelligence indicated that the banker suffered from a rare heart condition that he kept secret from his business associates, information that could be exploited through careful manipulation of his medication regimen. Lydia's medical expertise was focused on developing a compound that would interact fatally with Pemberton's existing heart medications while producing symptoms that would appear to be the natural progression of his underlying condition. Her knowledge of cardiac pharmaceuticals allowed her to create a preparation that would be virtually undetectable in post-mortem examination. Mercy's contribution involved arranging for the modified medication to be substituted for Pemberton's legitimate prescriptions through manipulation of the supply chain that connected Boston's pharmacies with their sources of imported drugs. Her understanding of shipping logistics allowed her to orchestrate this substitution without leaving evidence of tampering. Abigail's role centered on creating the social circumstances that would ensure Pemberton continued taking his medication, despite any suspicions he might develop about changes in its effects. Her business relationships with the banker provided opportunities for casual interaction that could be used to monitor his condition and adjust their plan as necessary. Morton's contribution was to ensure that Pemberton's death would be attributed to natural causes and that any physical evidence of poisoning would be eliminated during the preparation of his body for burial. The Undertaker's professional reputation would lend credibility to the natural death explanation, while his access to the corpse would allow him to remove or disguise any suspicious physical evidence. The execution of their plan began in late June, when Pemberton's prescription medications were successfully replaced with the modified compounds developed by Lydia. The banker's death on July 8 was attributed to sudden cardiac failure resulting from his previously undiagnosed heart condition, a diagnosis that satisfied both his family and the medical community. Pemberton's funeral, conducted by Morton with appropriate dignity and discretion, was attended by much of Boston's banking and commercial community. The three widows were present among the mourners, their expressions reflecting appropriate grief for a respected member of their social circle whose death had solved significant financial problems for all of them. With Pemberton's elimination, the four-member conspiracy had demonstrated its ability to coordinate complex operations while maintaining the appearance of respectability that was essential to their continued success. However, their growing confidence had also led to increased risks, as their pattern of eliminations began to attract attention from unexpected quarters. Dr. Lemuel Hayes, one of Boston's most experienced physicians, had been reviewing recent mortality records as part of a study of disease patterns in the city's wealthy districts. His research had revealed statistical anomalies that suggested certain types of deaths were occurring with unusual frequency among specific social groups. Dr. Hayes's analysis indicated that sudden deaths from cardiac and digestive conditions had increased significantly among middle-aged men connected to Boston's merchant community, while similar conditions appeared to be declining among other demographic groups. This pattern suggested either a specific environmental cause affecting wealthy merchants or a more sinister explanation involving deliberate poisoning. The physician's concerns were heightened by his personal knowledge of several recent cases, including Bradshaw, Whitmore, Crawford, and Pemberton, all of whom had died under circumstances that seemed suspicious when viewed collectively rather than individually. Dr. Hayes began conducting a more detailed investigation of these cases, seeking evidence that would either confirm or refute his growing suspicions about their causes. His investigation led to the discovery that all four men had been attended by different physicians during their final illnesses, making it unlikely that their deaths resulted from consistent misdiagnosis or inappropriate treatment by a single practitioner. More troubling was his realization that all four funerals had been conducted by the same undertaker, suggesting a connection that extended beyond coincidence. Dr. Hayes's suspicions about Ezekiel Morton were based on his professional knowledge of how different causes of death affected the human body, knowledge that led him to question whether the Undertaker had observed the same inconsistencies that would have been apparent to any careful observer. The physician began to wonder whether Morton's silence indicated ignorance, complicity, or something more sinister. The doctor's investigation took a dramatic turn when he discovered that Morton had recently purchased several chemical compounds that had no apparent application to legitimate undertaking practices, but would be useful for concealing evidence of poisoning. These purchases suggested that the Undertaker was actively involved in covering up murders, rather than simply failing to report suspicious deaths. Armed with this evidence, Dr. Hayes approached city authorities with his concerns about the recent deaths and Morton's possible involvement in their concealment. His reputation and detailed documentation convinced officials to authorize a formal investigation of the Undertaker's activities and the circumstances surrounding the suspicious deaths. The investigation that followed would ultimately expose the conspiracy that had operated beneath Boston's respectable facade for months, revealing how three widows and an undertaker had used their respective skills to eliminate obstacles to their continued prosperity while maintaining their positions in polite society. Morton's arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit murder came as a shock to Boston's social community, where the Undertaker had been respected as a pillar of discretion and dignity. The evidence against him included not only the suspicious chemical purchases but also physical evidence recovered from his funeral home that linked him directly to the modified medications used in several of the murders. Under interrogation, Morton revealed the full extent of the conspiracy, providing authorities with detailed information about his three partners and their respective roles in the various eliminations. His cooperation was motivated partly by self-preservation and partly by genuine remorse for his participation in activities that had violated his professional ethics and personal conscience. The arrests of Abigail Thornton, Lydia Blackwood, and Mercy Standish created a sensation in Boston society, where the three women had been respected as examples of feminine virtue, successfully navigating the challenges of widowhood. The revelation that they had been systematically murdering men who threatened their interests challenged fundamental assumptions about women's nature and capabilities. The trial that followed became one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in Boston's history, attracting attention not only for the crimes themselves, but also for the questions they raised about gender roles, social respectability, and the hidden networks that operated beneath the surface of civilized society. The prosecution's case was built on Morton's testimony, physical evidence recovered from the funeral home, and a detailed reconstruction of how the conspiracy had operated over the course of nearly a year. The evidence revealed a level of sophistication and coordination that challenged contemporary assumptions about women's intellectual capabilities while demonstrating the deadly potential of feminine collaboration. The defense attempted to portray the three women as victims of Morton's manipulation, arguing that the Undertaker had exploited their grief and vulnerability to involve them in crimes they would never have contemplated independently. This strategy proved unsuccessful in the face of overwhelming evidence of their active participation and leadership roles in the conspiracy. All four defendants were convicted of multiple counts of murder and conspiracy, sentences that reflected both the severity of their crimes and the community's outrage at their betrayal of social trust. The three women were executed on October 15, 1801, while Morton received a life sentence in recognition of his cooperation with authorities. The executions were attended by large crowds who came to witness the end of individuals who had shattered Boston's sense of security and respectability. The three widows faced their deaths with dignity, maintaining their innocence to the end despite overwhelming evidence of their guilt. The case of the three respectable ladies and their Undertaker became a cautionary tale about the dangers of assuming that social respectability guaranteed moral virtue. It demonstrated how individuals could use their positions in society to commit crimes that would have been impossible for those outside established social networks. The conspiracy also revealed the vulnerabilities inherent in Boston's tight-knit merchant community, where personal relationships and social trust created opportunities for exploitation by those willing to abuse established conventions. The case led to increased scrutiny of sudden deaths among prominent citizens and changes in the procedures used to investigate suspicious mortality. Perhaps most significantly, the case challenged contemporary assumptions about women's capacity for violence and criminal sophistication. The three widows had demonstrated levels of planning, coordination, and emotional detachment that contradicted prevailing beliefs about feminine nature and moral sensibilities. Their story became a reminder that evil could manifest in the most unexpected forms, wearing masks of respectability and virtue while pursuing goals that were fundamentally selfish and destructive. The handwritten recipe that had connected our previous Georgia cases paled in comparison to the living conspiracy that had operated within Boston's most respectable circles. The four partners in murder had created a network of death that extended across Boston's social and commercial communities, touching lives and destroying families while maintaining facades that fooled even those closest to them. Their downfall came not through moral awakening or external justice, but through the inevitable contradictions that arise when criminal activities grow too ambitious and patterns become too obvious to ignore. Thank you for joining me in exploring this dark chapter of Boston's early history. The case of the three respectable ladies and their Undertaker reminds us that appearances can be profoundly deceiving, and that evil often wears the most convincing masks. Your continued engagement with these forgotten stories helps ensure that the lessons they contain are not lost to time. I welcome your thoughts and reflections on these troubling events, and I look forward to our next journey into the shadows of American history. Until then, remember that the most dangerous predators are often those who have earned our trust and respect.